On an average afternoon, a hiker enters Olympic National Park through one of the most beautiful trailheads in North America, walks into old-growth forest so dense and so green that it feels like the inside of a cathedral, and does not come back. Not lost for a few hours and found embarrassed on a ridge. Gone. No body recovered, no gear located, no explanation that satisfies anyone who reads the case file. 3.7 million people visited this park in 2024. Most came home with photographs. Some did not come home at all. The danger here is not what the brochure warns you about. Olympic National Park covers 922,000 acres of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, nearly 1 million acres, roughly the size of Rhode Island. It spans 3 entirely different ecosystems compressed into a single park boundary. There are glaciated mountain peaks rising to nearly 8,000 feet at the summit of Mount Olympus. There are 73 miles of wild Pacific coastline battered by storms rolling in across thousands of miles of open ocean. And between those extremes, filling the western valleys like a slow green tide, there is one of the last intact temperate rainforests in the lower 48 states. 95% of the park, over 876,000 acres, is congressionally designated wilderness. That designation means no roads, no structures, no cell towers, and in many areas, no maintained trail. The park contains over 3,000 miles of rivers and streams, 32 named glaciers, and 56 species of mammals. It is the 8th most visited national park in the country. It is the rainforest that draws the crowds. It is also the rainforest that creates the conditions most likely to kill them. The illusion of safety in Olympic National Park is more completely constructed than in almost any other dangerous landscape in America because it is built from the landscape's own beauty. The Grand Canyon announces its danger with a mile-deep void. The Boundary Water's danger is embedded in the gap between air temperature and water temperature, invisible until the moment of immersion. Olympic's danger is embedded in the appearance of life itself, in the green, the moss, the soft light through the canopy, the silence. Every visual cue the forest presents reads as benign. Every one of those readings is wrong. The first illusion is that green means safe. The western valleys of Olympic receive between 140 and 170 inches of rain every year, nearly 12 feet of precipitation. Seattle, 100 miles to the east, receives 37 inches. The eastern side of the peninsula, just 60 miles from the rainforest, receives 25. The difference is orographic lift. Pacific storms slam into the Olympic Mountains and are forced upward, cooling as they rise, releasing all that moisture onto the western slopes. The result is the wettest location in the contiguous United States. That moisture produces the forest, the 15-foot diameter Sitka spruce, the nurse logs stretching for hundreds of feet, the curtains of club moss hanging motionless in the still air. It also produces rivers that can rise chest deep in hours, hillsides that release without warning, and a cold so persistent and so wet that it can kill a prepared hiker who makes a single bad decision about when to stop moving. The second illusion is that the park's infrastructure extends into the wilderness. Most visitors arrive at the Hoh Rainforest parking lot, walk the Hall of Moss's trail, barely over a mile, walkable with a stroller, and experience something that feels managed, accessible, safe. The parking lot, the visitor center, the maintained gravel path, the interpretive signs, these things create an impression that the Olympic wilderness is a version of the same environment, just larger. It is not. 95% of the park is designated wilderness, with no roads, no structures, and in many sections, no maintained trail at all. The boundary between the Hall of Mosses and the backcountry is physically invisible. Visitors cross it without knowing, and the forest does not announce the transition. The third illusion is that the forest is legible, that its dangers can be read from its surface, that a person with reasonable outdoor experience can assess the risks and respond to them in time. This illusion is the most dangerous of the three because Olympic's primary hazards are specifically the ones that are hardest to read. Cold water looks like water. The canopy that blocks GPS looks like shade. The river crossing that was safe at 8 a.m. looks, at 4 p.m., like a different river entirely, because it is. 70 to 80% of the annual precipitation falls between October and April. In November 2021, a single atmospheric river dropped more than 10 inches of rain in 24 hours across the Olympic National Forest. Rivers that were ankle deep in August became chest-high torrents carrying logs the size of telephone poles. Trails that existed the previous week vanished under mudslides. The ground the map shows is not always the ground that is there. Start with the forest itself. Because the forest is the first thing that works against the visitor who leaves the maintained trail, and because it does so in a way that most people have never encountered and cannot intuitively prepare for. The canopy in the old-growth valleys of Olympic is so dense that GPS units lose satellite lock entirely. A phone shows no signal. A handheld navigation device flickers, searches, and returns nothing useful. This is not a temporary condition or an edge case. It is the structural reality of moving beneath a canopy that has been building for centuries, layering growth over growth until the sky is barely visible and the signals that modern navigation depends on cannot penetrate. Acoustic ecologist Gordon Hempton designated a specific location in the whole rainforest as 1 square inch of silence in 2005, arguing it was one of the quietest places remaining in the United States. Measured ambient noise levels there can drop below 20 decibels, quieter than a whisper in an empty room. That silence is ecologically extraordinary. It is also, for a hiker who is off trail and disoriented in fading light with no GPS fix and no audible reference point, a form of total sensory deprivation. No river sound to orient by, no traffic hum from a distant road, no aircraft overhead, no human noise of any kind. Direction becomes uncertain, distance becomes impossible to judge, time stretches and compresses in ways the brain is not equipped to compensate for. Disorientation in this terrain kills faster than any animal because it does not feel like danger until the person is already lost. And by the time they recognize what has happened, they may be in conditions from which self-rescue is no longer possible. Between 2007 and 2023, 52 people died inside Olympic National Park. The leading cause of death was drowning, responsible for 19% of all fatalities. Not drowning in the ocean, not drowning in lakes, drowning in rivers, in the same rivers that appear on the trail map as blue lines crossing the route at established ford points. The park has over 3,000 miles of rivers and streams, and many backcountry crossings are unbridged. Hikers wade through on foot, picking their way across slippery, mossy rocks and water that runs between 34 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Glacial melt from the 32 glaciers clinging to the park's highest peaks. A crossing that is safe at 8 in the morning can be chest-deep and impassable by 4 in the afternoon if rain has fallen upstream, which in Olympic it frequently has, whether or not any rain is falling where the hiker is standing. The water moves with a force that is disproportionate to its appearance. A river that looks crossable can knock a person off their feet before they are halfway across. At 34 to 40 degrees, the muscles stop responding within minutes. Swimming becomes impossible before the victim recognizes that they are no longer able to swim. In June 2025, an 18-year-old visitor was found completely submerged and pinned between the first and second drops at Solduke Falls. He had been walking across the rocks at the top of the waterfall when he slipped. The drop was perhaps 15 feet. The water caught him, held him, and did not let go. Hypothermia is the second invisible killer, and Olympic is consistently among the national parks with the highest hypothermia fatality counts. The mechanism is deceptively simple and deceptively fast, and it exploits precisely the conditions that Olympic produces on an ordinary autumn afternoon. A hiker gets wet in a forest that receives 12 feet of rain. This is not a question of if, but when. Winter temperatures hover around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, not cold enough to seem immediately dangerous, cold enough to kill in hours if clothing is soaked and wind moves through the canopy. The body begins shivering to generate heat. Then the shivering stops, which feels like improvement, but is the opposite. It means the body has exhausted its capacity to warm itself. Core temperature drops below 95 degrees. Confusion sets in. Coordination deteriorates. Decisions begin to seem rational that are not. The victim removes a jacket because they feel warm. This is called paradoxical undressing, and it is one of the most reliable signs that hypothermia has reached a stage from which self-rescue is no longer possible. Search teams in the Pacific Northwest have found victims without their coats, sometimes without their boots, in terrain where removing either one is a death sentence. The cold in Olympic does not feel like cold. It feels like comfort, and then it feels like nothing at all. And then there are the ones who leave the trailhead and are never seen again. Cases that illuminate, more than any statistic, the scale of what the Olympic wilderness can conceal. In late October 2022, a 35-year-old solo hiker named Laura Mackey set out from the Graves Creek trailhead with a backcountry permit for the Enchanted Valley. She planned to camp at Pyrites Creek, approximately 13.5 miles from the trailhead. A significant rainstorm began the same day she entered the backcountry. She never returned. 19 separate agencies participated in the search that followed. Ground teams hiked into the wilderness and spent nights in the Enchanted Valley area. Multiple canine units, drones, boats, and helicopters swept the trail corridor and surrounding terrain. The search extended deep into off-trail zones. After 7 days, with weather deteriorating, the operation was scaled back. Laura Mackey's family organized volunteer searches the following spring, walking the section between Pony Creek Bridge and Fire Creek when the ground cover was still short enough to see through. They found nothing, no gear, no clothing, no remains. A person drove to the trailhead, walked into the forest, and the forest erased every trace of her. Laura Mackey was not the first to vanish along that corridor. In January 1992, Stefan Bissert, a 23-year-old German Fulbright scholar at Oregon State University, set out on a solo-day hike from Sol Duke Hot Springs. His plan was ambitious: 24 miles over High Divide and out to the Hoh River trailhead in January before dark. He was not equipped for a winter night in the Olympic Mountains. He carried what a person carries for a long day walk, not what a person carries for survival. He never arrived at the Hoh side. He was never seen again. No trace of Stefan Bissert has ever been recovered from that mountain. A 73-year-old experienced hiker named John Devine set out from near Mount Baldy in the Olympic National Forest. The approach involved the Maynard Burn Trail, described by searchers as extremely steep and rugged. Devine was known as an experienced hiker who knew the area. A weeks-long search was launched. During that search, a rescue helicopter crashed on the mountain, killing all 3 crew members aboard. 3 people died trying to find one missing hiker. John Devine himself was never located. Not a boot, not a pack strap, not a single physical object was ever recovered to confirm where he had been. In June 2006, 47-year-old Gilbert Gilman drove to the Staircase Ranger Station and was last seen by a park ranger on June 24th. When he failed to meet a colleague the following day, he was reported missing. 10 days of searching covered steep, rocky hills, dense forest, and the banks of the North Fork Skokomish River. They found nothing. His mother told reporters that it was hard to imagine a person could simply disappear, that nothing was ever found. The case acquired a disturbing additional dimension years later when investigators recognized that serial killer Israel Keyes had lived in nearby Nia Bay since 2001 and held multiple overnight backcountry permits for Olympic National Park. Keyes confessed to killing individuals in Washington and disposing of bodies in remote locations, including Lake Crescent, a glacially carved lake that reaches 650 feet at its deepest point. Whether Keyes was involved in Gilman's disappearance has never been established, but it underscores a reality that most recreational hikers never contemplate. The wilderness does not only conceal natural hazards, it conceals human ones as well. In September 2017, 71-year-old Brian Lee Johnston drove to the Ozette Trailhead on the park's remote northwestern coast and planned a 2- or 3-day hike on the Ozette Loop Trail, 9-mile circuit following plank boardwalks to the Pacific. More than 50 park rangers and volunteer search teams from 3 counties searched for him. They found his truck in the parking lot, receipts from Port Angeles businesses dated the day he left Seattle, and nothing else. Brian Lee Johnston walked onto a planked trail 3 miles from the ocean and was never seen again. In November 2025, 26-year-old Aliasia Bulia traveled alone from St. Louis to visit Olympic. She was last seen shopping on November 17th. Her rental car was found on November 30th near the Sol Duke Falls trailhead. More than 2 months of searching followed, involving 41 search and rescue personnel and 5 K9 teams before her body was located in an off-trail area of the Sol Duke Valley near Hidden Lake, less than a few miles from where her car had been parked the entire time, unreachable by anyone who was looking for her. The predators in Olympic are real, documented, and present in places that most visitors assume are too trafficked to carry meaningful risk. The entire park is officially classified as cougar territory by the National Park Service. Washington State is home to an estimated 1,500 mountain lions, and they hunt year-round across every elevation and terrain type in Olympic. In July 2023, an 8-year-old boy was attacked by a cougar while camping with his family near Lake Angeles in the Heart of the Hills area, one of the park's most accessible and heavily used camping zones. The animal abandoned its attack only after the child's mother screamed at it. 2 years later, in July 2025, a 4-year-old was bitten by a collared mountain lion on a popular trail near Victoria Overlook at Hurricane Ridge. one of the most visited locations in the entire park, accessible by paved road, with families present on the trail every summer afternoon. Witnesses described the child's father physically pulling the animal away. The child was airlifted to a trauma center in Seattle. Rangers tracked and killed the cougar the following morning. These were not remote backcountry encounters. They were incidents at groomed, paved, heavily trafficked locations where the infrastructure signals safety in exactly the way that the Hall of Moss's parking lot does, and where the cougar, indifferent to those signals, made its own assessment. Even the forest's most fundamental assumption, that a temperate rainforest receiving 12 feet of rain per year cannot burn, has been disproven within the last several years. In July 2025, a human-caused fire ignited near Lake Cushman in the Olympic National Forest. The Bear Gulch fire started as a manageable incident. Then, in September, it grew by 5,000 acres in a single 24-hour period. By the time it was fully contained in November, it had burned over 20,000 acres and caused $42.6 million in damage. It was the largest fire on the Olympic Peninsula since the Great Forks Fire of 1951. Forced evacuations closed roads across the peninsula. Nobody died, but the fire proved something that the forest's appearance has consistently denied. Even the wettest forest in the contiguous United States can burn, and when the right combination of drought, wind, and ignition source occurs, it can burn fast and large enough to trap anyone who has assumed that the rain is protection. The indigenous peoples of the Olympic Peninsula have understood these dangers for longer than any federal management framework has existed to address them. The Ho, Kino, Maka, Quileute, Lower Elwha Klallam, Skokomish, and Jamestown's Klallam tribes have lived on this land for thousands of years. Their relationship with the forest is not recreational. It is generational survival knowledge, accumulated through millennia of direct experience with the same terrain that kills unprepared visitors in a matter of hours. They know which valleys flood first, which ridges hold snow latest, which drainages become impassable, and exactly when. The National Park Service now collaborates with tribal communities on conservation and co-stewardship projects and acknowledges on its own website the tribe's long-standing relationship with these lands. That knowledge exists because generation after generation observed, remembered, and passed down where the forest provides and where it takes. It was never written in a guidebook because it did not need to be written. It was demonstrated directly by the landscape itself, the people who were paying close enough attention to learn from it. This is what makes Olympic uniquely dangerous in its risk profile and what distinguishes it from the other landscapes in this series. The Grand Canyon is visually extreme. The Boundary Waters danger is embedded in a specific, describable gap, air temperature versus water temperature, that can at least be communicated in a safety briefing. Olympic's danger is convergent. 140 inches of rain creates rivers that drown experienced hikers. The same moisture grows a canopy that kills GPS signal. The cold is never dramatic enough to frighten a visitor into preparation, just persistent enough to shut the body down. Cougars hunt on the same groomed trails where families push strollers. The terrain changes so rapidly that a path walked at dawn can be unrecognizable by dusk. And when something goes wrong, a slip on a mossy log, a misjudged river crossing, a trail lost in fading light, help is not arriving quickly. There are 660 miles of trail in this park, and a fraction of the ranger staff needed to patrol them. Search and rescue response in the backcountry is measured in days, not hours, and some searches end the way Laura Macca's ended, and Stefan Bissart's, and John Devine's. The illusion operating across all of these dangers is the same illusion that operates everywhere wilderness has been packaged as tourism, that the infrastructure of the visitor experience extends into the landscape the visitor is entering. It does not. The parking lot, the visitor center, the interpretive signs, the stroller-friendly trail, these things end at the trailhead. Past that boundary, Olympic maintains the same conditions it has maintained for millennia. Rivers that rise without warning, a canopy that eliminates navigation, cold that impairs judgment before the victim recognizes it is cold, and a forest dense enough to conceal a person completely within a mile of the road they drove in on. The forest is not trying to kill anyone who enters it. It is simply being what it has been, 922,000 acres of temperate rainforest in the wettest corner of the contiguous United States, where it rains nearly 12 feet a year, where rivers run at 34 degrees year-round, where the canopy closes over the sky and the GPS signal and the sound of anything human, and where the distance between the Hall of Moss's parking lot and a landscape from which no search team has ever returned, someone alive is measured in steps, not miles. It doesn't care about your day hike plan. It never did. Subscribe, because the wilderness doesn't warn you and someone should.